Does the openness of God movement have any impact on the holiness of God? Is that does it diminish the concept of the holiness of God? The first thought that went through my mind when you asked that question was a vivid image that I heard before lunch from John MacArthur, where the Son of Man has a sword coming out of his mouth, going after false prophets. I don't believe that openness theology is part of the intramural debate within evangelical Christianity between Arminians and Calvinists and so on. I believe it's sub-Christian and anti-Christian, and the true Christians ought to flee for their lives from this theology. And the thing that's so scary to me is that how popular it's becoming with the people, because it's based upon a simplistic hermeneutic or principle of interpreting the Scripture, and it not only diminishes the holiness of God, it diminishes the whole nature of God. And I think it's significant that the people who developed this particular approach to God understood at the outset and declared self-consciously that they were seeking to develop a doctrine of God somewhere between process theology on the one hand and classical orthodox theism on the other. So when I say this is not orthodox theism, I'm simply seconding the motion of their expositors themselves, who have declared at the outset their recognition that they are making a conscious departure from orthodox theism and certainly from orthodox Christianity. And apart from that, Paul, I really don't have an opinion.
Well, you know, some of the people who are promoting the openness theology are very winsome in their presentations. And I think a lot of people can be taken in by it before they even know what they're listening to. Can anybody here give us 2 or 3 earmarks of how you would identify openness theology? Either one?
Well, am I working?
Yeah, you're on.
Go.
Yeah.
Okay. I would just suggest that you read a book by Bruce Ware, W-A-R-E. I think it's something about a lesser God. I can't remember the title exactly, a lesser God. It really deals with this issue, and I do believe what R.C. Sproul said is exactly accurate. This is not Christianity. This is not the God of Christianity. This, therefore, is a false God. This is an idol. This is a God created to satisfy people's emotional needs. They want to sort of make God into a good guy, and this all is ostensibly about how could God do this and how could God do that and how could he allow this and allow that, and the answer to that is he doesn't allow that. He doesn't even know what's going to happen. He's not sure what's going to happen. He knows no more about the future than we do, and he's trying to adjust to what's happening like everybody else is trying to adjust to it. That's what it means. Ostensibly, this sort of removes the responsibility or the culpability from God for everything that's wrong in the world, which, by the way, God isn't interested in being removed from. He continually takes responsibility for everything. I've been preaching through Genesis and recently on the flood and noting how many times God says, I will destroy the world. If you think God is the ultimate good guy, then ask yourself how you could drown the entire human race and leave 8 people. And that to me is a massive indication of what God feels about sin and how he reacts to it. And you know, some estimates would go as high as, I've read some who would go as high as 7 billion people could have been on the earth at the time of the flood. And others would say a few million. But God drowned them all but 8 people, and repeatedly says, I will do it, I will do it, I have done it, I have done it. My spirit will not always strive with man, and so forth. So there's no need to somehow transform God into a likable, irresponsible being who's just trying to find his way through the maze like the rest of us. And as he said, I think this is not God. This is not God at all. This isn't anything that's true about God. It makes him like us, which is the antithesis of holiness, which is his utter separateness from what we are.
Sinclair, do you want to chime in on that?
Yes, I think, you know, reflecting on what Jerry Bridges said last night about the holiness of God, as on the one hand, his difference, he is the creator, we are creatures, and his difference also in the moral dimension, he is pure and we are sinful. And it seems to me that the openness of God movement, like all deviations from orthodox theology, from an orthodox doctrine of God, wriggles on both these points. Point number one, it wriggles because it wants to try and create a God who is more like us. And point number two, it wriggles, and this is the point that John is bringing out, on the point, surely we deserve better from the hands of God than what we are actually getting. When the presupposition of Scripture from Genesis 3 onwards is that anything we get from the hands of God is at least common grace, and in the case of the gift of Christ, special grace. And so, reflecting back on the questioner's desire to ask if the openness of God movement does anything to the holiness of God, the answer is, I think, in the last analysis, riding on the back of what Jerry said yesterday, actually destroys the holiness of God. And I think the interesting thing about all this is that, like so many things, and they come, I guess, in 10, 15-year cycles, this has flashed on evangelicalism as the latest new thing. And to me, it acts as a litmus test of whether we really are true evangelicals or not. Mm-hmm. And it sweeps away those who are on the margins. And sadly, I think in some cases, it would be improper to mention names. You would be able to detect from the writings of some of these men that they were already on the margins, and that this is a new thing that brings them a sense of satisfaction. My problem with that is, historically, the openness of God is no new thing. There really is in theology nothing new under the sun. And you go back, the openness of God was one of the characteristics of the theology of the Hellenistic world that the Apostle Paul was constantly counteracting. At the time of the Reformation, immediately following the Reformation, they went through all this all over again. They did it in Latin. People today are doing it in English. But it's the same old story. How can we reduce the threat to my autonomy that there is from the doctrine of an absolutely sovereign God who, as Paul says, works everything together according to the counsel of his own will? And the sheer logic of the grammar is that the counsel of his will is prior to the outworking of the will. The logic of the statement is that everything that comes to pass in accordance with God's decreed will. And instead of wriggling against that, I think our responsibility as exegetes of Scripture is to see how this plays out in what are admittedly difficult questions that the Scriptures themselves recognize are forced upon us by sometimes the strangeness of God's providences, by the fact that within the Scriptures themselves, the people of God who absolutely believe in the total sovereignty of God are frequently asking, how is it that the promises of God and the providences of God don't seem to coalesce together? To which the biblical answer is, wait and see. Don't invent a new God, but wait and see what this God will show to you. So I'm very much at one with what's been said.
If they're right, I'm going to sleep in tomorrow. Because there's no reason for me to trust a single promise of the future that God has given. Because not only the best laid plans of mice and men But the best laid plans of an open God are also open to the destruction by a maverick molecule or a human decision that changes everything.
Paul, can I add here, I think a great litmus test in many theological questions is this simple test: does it work with Jesus? Can you put together the openness of God and everything the gospel tells you about Jesus, who was crucified by the hands of cruel and wicked men according to the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God? And if it doesn't work with Jesus, it doesn't work. In a way, it's as simple as that.
Well, thank you.